Hello, I'm Larry Wilson, and welcome to this segment in our study on the book of Daniel. You know, Daniel is just full of wonderful things, foundational things that are important to understand if you're really going to at all comprehend what the book of Revelation is about. The books of Daniel and Revelation actually are one book, separated by 700 years. There are two writers, but Daniel and John write about the same thing. Daniel provides the foundational elements. John comes in and writes the conclusion to the story. And the way these two books mesh together is just an amazing thing. The reason this is kind of interesting to know is that Daniel is the only book in the Bible that's sealed up until the time of the end. And the result, what that really means, is that the book of Revelation can't be properly understood until the book of Daniel is understood. You know, newspapers indicate that we live in a world that is reeling from conflict and sin. In the past week, we have seen headlines that I never thought I would see. There's a controversy going on in this nation over legalizing gay marriage. There is a conflict over about everything you can think of. An openly gay Anglican bishop was elected this past week. In the last year, I saw this headline just the other day, 400 Catholic priests have resigned during the past year because of molesting children. 400. We heard this past week, terrorism strikes in Jakarta, Indonesia, killing several. North Korea intends to sell nuclear arms. Iran is building nuclear facilities. And the persecution of Christians is ramping up in various places of this world, in China, in India, and in other countries. The world is reeling out of control, but it is the unsealing of Daniel that proves to me, beyond a shadow of doubt, that we are living at the time of the end. God has set the limits of time, and the time of the end is spoken of in the book of Daniel many times. Remember Daniel 12:4, the angel Gabriel said to Daniel, "Close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end." He replied to Daniel, "Go your way, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." But look at chapter 8, verse 19. Gabriel said to Daniel, "I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath." In the time of wrath. I want you to remember these three words, time of wrath. Because the vision that you have received in Daniel 8 concerns the appointed time of the end, which incidentally happens to be a time of wrath. The 7 first trumpets and the 7 last trumpets. 7 first trumpets and the 7 last plagues. 14 events, time of wrath. Look at Habakkuk 2:2. Then the Lord replied to Habakkuk, "Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it, so people can hear. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." There's no delay here. Wait for it. God has a master plan, and we've got to wait for it, the timing, for it to unfold. It always happens right on time. God is never tardy. Never tardy. The book of Daniel is a divine alarm clock. For 2,600 years, it has been silently but steadily ticking, carefully measuring the passage of time. The book of Daniel begins to unfold. And we have the the passage of time, and you can see the head of gold, the chest of silver, the thighs of brass, the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And you see the vertical alignment. God has, with repetition and enlargement, has given us a way to examine the passage of time. Daniel is ticking off. Here's the time of Christ, and the time goes on by, time passes, and the vision of Daniel 8 concerns the appointed time of the end. And you'll notice that just at the right time, we'll get over here to where the horn power will appear at just the right time. And God has a plan. And He's laid out His plan very clearly in Bible prophecy so that we can examine it and study it and see how it fits into the great week. Truly a marvelous thing to behold and to see how wonderfully intricate are the ways of God. Well, I thought you would like to consider that because the book of Daniel is just no ordinary book. When the final generation arrives on earth, the book of Daniel is like an alarm clock that goes off for those who are willing to study. Now, if you're not willing to study and investigate and master the book of Daniel, there's nothing that can be done for you. If you're not willing to open up God's Word and study for yourself, this realization won't be very significant. But I can assure you, when you begin from your own study to see and understand the very things I'm trying my best to encourage you to investigate, these seminars are not here for the purpose of telling you what to believe. They are for the purpose of inspiring you and encouraging you and agitating you to study God's Word for yourself. When you finally begin to understand the book of Daniel, the most amazing thing happens. You will discover, like I have discovered, this is it. The end is here. Behold, the bridegroom comes. Well, let's go examine this part of the clock of Daniel and notice how this all comes together. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed, and he wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." Zooming forward in time, the angel tells Daniel, "I approached one of those standing there beside the sea and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things." He says, "The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth." 4 great kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But, he says, the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Okay, so we know that these 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms. Now, let's notice verse 4. Daniel 7, verse 4. The first beast was like a lion. It had the wings of an eagle, and I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man. And the heart of a man was given to it. This lion represents the kingdom of Babylon. The lion is to the animal world what gold is to the metal world, king. The golden head in Daniel 2 represents the kingdom of Babylon, Daniel 2:38. And the lion in Daniel 7 also represents the first kingdom in the sequence. Remember Rule 1? Rule 1 states that the events of the vision occur in their order. And in Daniel 7:23, we know that these four beasts are four great kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar was reduced to living like an animal for 7 years, and his experience and the arrogance of his great-grandson Belshazzar is mirrored in this lion that becomes arrogant and puffed up like a man. The head of gold and the 90-foot-tall golden image that Nebuchadnezzar built reflects Nebuchadnezzar's great wealth and his love for gold. The hanging gardens of Babylon were considered one of the 7 wonders of the world in its day. Okay, verse 5. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides. This is kind of an interesting point, that one side of this kingdom is higher than the other. And it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, get up and eat all the flesh you want. Eat your fill. The idea being here that these kingdoms, these nations that it's going to conquer would just be given to it. God enabled the Medes and the Persians to overthrow Babylon in 539 BC, and the Persians became the dominant or higher side of this kingdom. And we find this again highlighted in Daniel 8, where the ram has 2 horns, and one of the horns becomes more dominant than the other, longer, more strong, larger, more powerful. And so the Persian side of the kingdom became dominant. The 3 ribs represent the 3 provinces that the Medes and the Persians destroyed in order to take undisputed control of the world. And the 3 provinces that held out was the province of Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. Incidentally, the Medes and the Persians were known for their artistry and fascination with silver. And it's interesting that God made the chest of the metal man silver. Verse 6, Daniel 7, verse 6. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And it had on its back 4 wings, like those of a bird. And this beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. Now we come to the Bronze Age. Remember, the thighs of brass occur after the chest of silver in Daniel 2. And we're going to find here that Alexander the Great, the king of Grecia, overcame the Persians in 331 BC. Alexander conquered the world in a mere 10 years, and at the height of his power, he died of swamp fever at age 33. His kingdom did not go to his heirs. His kingdom was eventually divided among his 4 generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. These are the 4 heads of the leopard. And then in Daniel 7, verse 7, after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. And it had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. Now this beast is really something to think about for a moment. This monster beast has no parallel. It's a beast that has large iron teeth. It's fitting that this parallels, with the legs of iron. And it crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. Rome's strategy was very simple. Scorched earth policy. Let me show you a little animation that will help you to see and understand this process that we've been looking at in Daniel 7. You've seen this animation before. We're looking at the progression of time. The lion, the bear, looking at the red line in the middle of your screen, the lion, the bear, the leopard, the monster. And notice we're looking at these nations and how they parallel, with the Daniel 2. Well, I'm making a mess of the screen there, aren't I? Let me play that one more time so that you can see how God is using repetition and enlargement. The lion and the bear in the chest, the leopard and the thighs, and the monster and the legs are parallels of each other. And we zoom in and we can see that even the ram and the goat, look at all three. Look at all three. The ram and the goat, the leopard, the thighs, all those represent the same thing. And what God is actually doing here is simple. There's no mystery here. God is trying to show us who would live at the end of time the progression of time. That people get all hung up on trying to point fingers at this or that entity or that organization or who that is, and they're missing the larger picture. God is trying to tell us about the passage of time. And when we come to the fourth beast, who has the iron teeth, and he has the 10 horns, the fourth beast is the kingdom of Rome. The kingdom of Rome is unique. I guess that's the best word to say. The teeth of iron and the legs of iron in Daniel 2 are striking parallels. Rome was the first kingdom to use iron extensively in its military. And I would like to show you another animation, which you've seen before, but I want you just to look at it. Here we're going to look at the animals and the parts of the image. Remember that we're going to take Daniel 2. There's the image. Pull that apart, put it in the right box. We're going to look at the lion and the bear, and notice the parallel. Then we're going to look at the leopard with the 4 wings and the thighs of brass, and the monster, the legs of iron, with the 10 horns. And then to make sure there's no place to get confused, God put the ram and the goat so that we have the alignment of the ram and the goat, the bear, the leopard, the chest, and the thighs. So there's no question about the progression of time. The clock is ticking. And each nation represents a period of time. That's the real point here. Okay, let's go on back to the computer screen. So Daniel says, while I was thinking about the horns, he was looking at the 10 horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Let me pause on this and make a couple of interesting observations. History, and in our next October tape of the month, we're going to examine the little horn rather carefully and very thoughtfully. But let me just put this in context. God gave Abraham a promise. He was going to use Abraham's descendants and try through his descendants to accomplish his purposes on earth. And you know how God delivered the seed of Abraham from Egypt, from slavery, and then took them eventually to the promised land. And you know the apostasy of Israel. You know their story, you know its history. You've read some of the Bible, I'm sure, and are acquainted, with the history of Israel and its apostasy. So much so that when Jesus himself came, the Messiah, Israel rejected him and insisted that he be crucified. Then Jesus established the Christian church while he was on earth. And after Jesus went back to heaven, the Christian church eventually located its authority and its position in Rome. And the Roman Christian church eventually came the Roman Catholic Church. The word Catholic means universal. It didn't mean a religion back then, but as it does today. So the Roman Catholic Church came out of the nation of Rome, Roman Catholic Church, and the Church of Rome is actually God proving a profound point. And the point is that Christians will do the very same thing that Jews would do. Namely, reject Christ. This is why God raised up the Protestant Reformation. God raised up Protestants. But again, God's purpose in doing this is to prove that once again, man will do in the last days. Protestantism is basically reserved for the last days. Men will do again what Christians have done and what Jews have done. What I'm trying to tell you, how many of you watching this video right now believe that you would have been smart enough to get on the ark in Noah's day? Oh yes, I would. I'm sure. I know I would. I wouldn't have been that stupid to stay outside the door. Well, just a minute. Only 8 people got on board the ark. And so what would the chances have been if you had been there of you getting on the ark? Very small. Very small. And if you had been a citizen of Israel during the 1470 years that God patiently dealt with that nation, wouldn't you have been pretty much like everybody else? Because today you're pretty much like those around you? Yes. What God is trying to show in the history of Christianity and the history of Israel and the history of Protestantism is that humanity is one big mess. This little horn in Daniel 7 that came up and plucked up 3 of the original 10 horns so that the total was 8. 10 minus 3 is 7, plus the one that rises makes 8. This little horn is the Roman Catholic Church, and it has a very colorful and long history lasting 1,260 years in this prophecy of Daniel 7. And then God brings the papacy down so that Protestantism can come up. And Protestantism is one of the 7 heads of the beast in Revelation 13. So that at the end of the world, at the end of the age, we have 7 religious systems that are all false. All false. Protestantism today is as false and corrupt as is Judaism, as is Catholicism, as is the Islamic view of God, as the Hindu view of God. The whole world is full of false religion. And that's precisely what the books of Daniel and Revelation are trying to alert us to the fact that we are at the end of the age, and at the end of the age, error and falsehood have become universal. That's why there are 7 heads. And one of the 7 heads in Revelation 13 had been wounded, and that head represents the papacy, which experienced a deadly wound in 1798. But we'll study that later. What I want you to understand is that in Daniel 7, as I said, next time we're going to look at the little horn under the magnifying glass, because this is an identity and this is an interpretation which Christians living in our age, many have seemed to have overlooked. And we're going to set the record straight, and we're going to put the truth out there. And it's not very politically correct, and it's not very politically polite, but this is the truth. And the Bible tells us the truth. The Bible says that this little horn that came up out of Rome had the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. The idea here is that this little horn understands things, sees things, and says things unlike the others, the other seven. It's the eighth horn, you know, that's going to rule over the other seven. It's stronger than the others. This little horn power is going to have authority for 1,260 years. And you know, let me go back to the little illustration we were looking at just a minute ago. Let me put the Daniel illustration back on the computer for you to look at so that you can see the progression of time. Here's the Babylon, and here is Medo-Persia, and here's Greece. Here's Rome. Here's the monster. And the monster, we're going to find, Rome, comes to its end. We'll wait for the computer to start scanning here. The monster comes to its end as a result of the 10 horns within Rome breaking up Rome. And then the little horn comes out and speaks boastfully for 1,260 years. So here's the 10 horns, and then we've got to go minus 3 because 3 are plucked up. So this is the 8th horn that rules over the 7, and he lasts for a time, and half a time. I don't know if you can see that written underneath there, but that's 1,260 years. Again, we're looking at the history of Christianity right here to see what Christians would do, because we have looked here to see what Israel has done up to the time Messiah was on the earth. That's basically what this is really all about. This is telling us, those of us who live at the end, that God has a plan. Well, we're out of time. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to understand. Daniel is so big, and I'm trying to open your eyes, inspire you, and encourage you to examine it. And we're going to look at this fourth beast, this fourth kingdom upon the earth, the little horn that comes out of it, the 1,260 years that it reigns and rules. And we're going to carefully identify it and make sure that there is no possibility of a misinterpretation. Well, may God bless you and keep you, is my prayer.